Somewhere in southern Turkey, about 11,000 years ago, someone lent someone else a bag of grain, and they expected it back. We don't know their names. We don't know if they were friends. But we know the grain was lent, because we found the records. Crude clay tablets, marks pressed into wet earth, a debt recorded before humans had invented almost anything else. Think about that for a second. We had debt before we had the wheel. We had credit before we had the alphabet, before we had a calendar, before we had a word for year. The very first thing humans decided was important enough to write down was not a prayer, not a poem, not a map. It was, you owe me. And 11,000 years later, tonight, while you sleep, that same system is still running. It doesn't need a clay tablet anymore. It doesn't need daylight. It doesn't need you awake. Tonight, inside a bank's servers, your balance will grow. Quietly, automatically, without asking your permission. And the reason you probably won't do anything about it is not because you're careless. It's because you are running 11,000-year-old software in a world that was redesigned around it last Tuesday. Here's what I mean. For almost all of human history, debt had a physical shape. When you borrowed grain, you could hold the grain. When you owed cattle, you could see the cattle. When the debt was paid, both people witnessed it. That physical reality was not incidental. It was the break. A farmer who borrowed 10 bushels of wheat felt the weight of that obligation every time he walked past his neighbor's field. The debt had presence. It was in the room with him. Then we invented abstraction. First coins, then paper notes, then ledger entries, then account numbers. Then a tap on your phone at a coffee shop at 7:48 in the morning when you haven't fully woken up yet. Each step removed one more layer of physical sensation from the act of spending, one more millimeter of separation between the pleasure of receiving and the pain of paying. By the time we got to the credit card, the break was essentially gone. In 2001, researchers at MIT split volunteers into two groups. Both groups bid on tickets to a sold-out sporting event. One group paid in cash, the other paid by card. The credit card group bid, on average, twice as much for the exact same seats. Same event, same night, same view, double the price. The card had made the money feel like someone else's problem. Behavioral economists call this payment decoupling. The pleasure registers now, the pain registers later. And because the human brain is wired to overvalue the present and undervalue the future, a trait that kept your ancestors alive on a savanna where next week was never guaranteed, the math never feels real until it's catastrophic. The banks understood this before the economists named it. They didn't design the minimum payment by accident. They designed it as a sedative. When your balance says $4,000, your brain wants to panic, but the minimum payment says $120. And $120 feels like relief. That relief is the machine working exactly as intended. Because the minimum payment was not designed to free you from debt. It was designed to keep you close enough to the fire to stay warm, but far enough from the exit that you forget the exit exists. It is every month you carry the balance forward. Every month you feel like you're handling it, while the number quietly, automatically grows. Credit card interest isn't applied once a year like a fine. It is broken into daily increments, applied every single night, compounded into the next morning's starting balance. At 24% annual interest, that is roughly 0.066% per day. Your brain cannot feel 0.066%. It registers no alarm. It barely produces a thought. But 0.066% applied daily to a $5,000 balance across 8 years of minimum payments produces something your brain absolutely can feel. You will pay the bank roughly $4,800 in interest alone, nearly what you originally spent, a second time, in installments small enough to feel routine. That is not an accident. That is the design. There is a concept in evolutionary biology called an evolutionary mismatch. Deer evolved to freeze when startled. In a dense forest, that instinct saves your life. On a highway, it kills you. The deer isn't stupid. It is running ancient software in a world that didn't exist when the software was written. Your brain was built for a world where the right move was to get what you could, right now. A world where debt was something you could see and feel every single morning. It was not built for a number on a screen that grows every night while you sleep. And the people who designed the modern credit system knew this. Not because they read biology papers, because they watched what humans actually do with money. They built their product around the gap. The gap between what we feel and what is mathematically true. The gap between the relief of the minimum payment and the reality of the compounding interest. The gap between the present, which feels free, and the future, which doesn't feel real yet. That gap is not your weakness. It is a feature of every human brain that has ever existed. But it is the specific feature the financial system was engineered to exploit. So here's the question nobody actually asks. If the system was designed around a flaw in human perception, can you beat it by changing your perception? The answer is yes. But not by wanting it more. Not by cutting out coffee. Not by downloading a budgeting app you'll forget in 4 days. Those fail because they fight the machine with willpower. And willpower is a mood. The machine runs 24 hours a day regardless of your mood. You beat it by doing what those ancient grain lenders did with their clay tablets. You make the debt physical again. You give it a shape. You force it back into the room. Open every card account. Write down 4 numbers: the balance, the interest rate, the minimum payment, and the amount you'd actually need to pay each month to kill it in 12 months. Not the comfortable number, the real number. Write it on paper. Because debt that lives as a vague anxiety in your head has no edges. It is everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, which is the ideal condition for avoidance. Debt written on a page is a specific, bounded, solvable problem. Then do 3 mechanical things. Stop adding new charges to the card carrying the balance. You cannot drain a bathtub while the faucet is still running. Pay more than the minimum, even $30 more. The minimum feeds the machine. Anything above it attacks the principal, which slows the compounding, which makes every future payment more powerful than the last. Build a small cash buffer, $500, $1,000, just enough so that every flat tire and vet bill stops becoming new debt. Because every new debt resets the clock, every time. These 3 things work not because they're clever, because they're mechanical. They don't require motivation. Just set up the system and let it run. The same way the debt machine runs, quietly, automatically, without asking your permission. 11,000 years ago, the first lender pressed marks into clay because a debt, unrecorded, disappears. It becomes deniable. It becomes comfortable. It becomes something you can almost forget about, until the day your neighbor shows up at the door and the number is twice what you remembered. Nothing about that has changed. The clay is now a server. The grain is now a balance. The marks are now a number that ticks upward every night while you sleep. But the principle is identical. A debt you can see is a debt you can fight. A debt you cannot see is a debt that is winning. Tonight, it is still running. Tomorrow, you could make it yours, but only if you face the numbers head on. So what's it going to be? Are you going to write the number down?